Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class lecture on Chapter 6, Functions, Types, and Anatomy of Bones. So, Chapter 6 is all about bone tissue, going into much more detail than we saw in Chapter 3. So, first off, what are some functions of the skeleton? Well, obviously it's for structural support. It gives our body its basic shape. Skeleton's also involved in protection. Protects things like our heart, our lungs, our brain. It also assists in movement with the aid of muscles. So yeah, we wouldn't be able to get anywhere if we didn't have bones acting as levers. Bones are also a site of mineral storage and release, especially calcium and phosphate. Within bones is red bone marrow, where you get blood cell production. And also within some bones you have yellow bone marrow, which is a site of triglyceride storage, or basically lipid or fat storage. Now it's important to remember that the skeletal system also needs cartilage in order to function properly, and cartilage is found at the joints or at places where two bones articulate. Some examples include the costal cartilage that connects the ribs to the sternum, the cartilage of the intervertebral discs found between each vertebrae in your vertebral column, the pubic symphysis, which attaches the two sides of the pelvis together, and so forth. Types of bones. Well, first of all, there's the long bones, and a long bone is basically longer than it is wide. These are the bones that are the only bones that have the diaphysis, which is the shaft, and within the diaphysis is the medullary cavity. The long bones include the humeri, the ulni, the radii, the metacarpals, the phalanges, the clavicles, the femora, the tibiae, the fibulae, and the metatarsals. Now you might be wondering why I said these words kind of funny. These are all examples of how the book pluralizes these words. Many of them, being Latin, are pluralized by the additions of an I or an E. Short bones. Well, they are basically sort of cubic in shape, so they're not exactly a perfect cube, but yeah, you can sort of see it. And these include the carpals in the wrist and almost all the tarsals in the foot. Flat bones. Flat bones are basically two thin plates of compact bone surrounding a layer of spongy bone. It's sort of a bony sandwich, I guess you could sort of think of it as. Examples of flat bones include the frontal bone in the skull, the occipital bone in the skull, the two parietals, the sternum in our chest, the ribs, the scapulae, and the pelvis. Then there are the irregular bones, and the irregular bones are, well, irregular or complex in their shape. These include the vertebrae, the sacrum, the coccyx, the calcaneae, the calcaneae, and the remaining bones of the skull. Sesamoid bones. Well, sesamoid bones vary in number from person to person. They tend to be really small in size and found in tendons that get stressed frequently. However, there is one kind of sesamoid bone that we would expect everyone to have, and that would be the patellae, one patella in each knee. And then there are the sutural bones. The sutural bones are small bones found in the sutures, or joints, of the cranial bones. They are also vary in number from person to person. Some people could have 0, and other people could have many. Now let's talk about the anatomy of the long bone. So as you can see on the left, we have a picture of a long bone with part of it cut in half to expose the inside. And you can see that the long bone is basically, the outside of it is a layer of compact bone, and the inside is often spongy bone. Now, with a long bone, you also have a rather long diaphysis, or shaft. And within that diaphysis, you find the medullary cavity, which is a sort of open space where in adults you will find yellow bone marrow. Also, you see there is a nutrient artery that enters, a rather large one that enters into the diaphysis that helps provide nutrients for the inside of the diaphysis. You also have at each end an epiphysis, which is basically just the ends of the bone. It is filled with spongy bone, and that spongy bone has in all its open spaces red bone marrow for blood production. The metathesis is basically in between the diaphysis and the epiphysis, and it includes the epiphyseal plate, which can be composed of hyaline cartilage if that person's long bones are still growing, say in a child, or it'll be a line of compact bone tissue if it's in an adult whose long bones are no longer growing. At the very ends of the bones, you will find the articular cartilage, which is needed to reduce friction and absorb shocks, and the articular cartilage is composed of hyaline cartilage specifically. Surrounding the outside of the bone is the periosteum. And the periosteum is composed of two layers. You get an outer fibrous layer of dense irregular connective tissue and an inner osteogenic layer that helps in bone formation on the width of the bone. And the periosteum is also an attachment point for ligaments and tendons. On the inside of the medullary cavity, or I guess on the inside of the diaphysis, lining the medullary cavity, is a thin membrane composed of bone-forming cells. It's called the endosteum. And it also lines the central canals within the osteums. And that is it for this part of the lecture.